Verses 16 to 18. A scholar that has acquaintance, and is in love, with the learning of the ancients, would think he should be very happy if he were where Paul now was, at Athens, in the midst of the various sects of philosophers, and would have a great many curious questions to ask them, for the explication of the remains we have of the Athenian learning. But Paul, though bred a scholar, and an ingenious active man, does not make this any of his business at Athens. He has other work to mind. It is not the improving of himself in their philosophy that he aims at. He has learned to call it a vain thing, and is above it. Colonel 2:8. His business is, in God's name, to correct their disorders in religion, and to turn them from the service of idols, and of Satan in them, to the service of the true and living God in Christ. Here is the impression which the abominable ignorance and superstition of the Athenians made upon Paul's spirit, v. 16. The account here given of that city, it was wholly given to idolatry. This agrees with the account which the heathen writers give of it, that there were more idols in Athens than there were in all Greece besides put together, and that they had twice as many sacred feasts as others had. Whatever strange gods were recommended to them, they admitted them, and allowed them a temple and an altar, so that they had almost as many gods as men facilius posses deum quam hominum invenire. And this city, after the empire became Christian, continued incurably addicted to idolatry, and all the pious edicts of the Christian emperors could not root it out, till, by the eruption of the Goths, that city was in so particular a manner laid waste that there are now scarcely any remains of it. It is observable that there, where human learning most flourished, idolatry most abounded, and the most absurd and ridiculous idolatry, which confirms that of the apostle, that when they professed themselves to be wise they became fools, Rom 1:22, and, in the business of religion, were of all other the most vain in their imaginations. The world by wisdom knew not God, 1 Cor 1:21. They might have reasoned against polytheism and idolatry, but, it seems, the greatest pretenders to reason were the greatest slaves to idols. So necessary was it to the re-establishing even of natural religion that there should be a divine revelation, and that centering in Christ. The disturbance which the sight of this gave to Paul. Paul was not willing to appear publicly till Silas and Timothy came to him, that out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses the word might be established, but in the meantime his spirit was stirred within him. He was filled with concern for the glory of God, which he saw given to idols, and with compassion to the souls of men, which he saw thus enslaved to Satan, and led captive by him at his will. He beheld these transgressors, and was grieved, and horror took hold of him. He had a holy indignation at the heathen priests, that led the people such an endless trace of idolatry, and at their philosophers, that knew better, and yet never said a word against it, but themselves went down the stream. The testimony that he bore against their idolatry, and his endeavors to bring them to the knowledge of the truth. He did not, as Witsius observes, in the heat of his zeal break into the temples, pull down their images, demolish their altars, or fly in the face of their priests, nor did he run about the streets crying, "You are all the bond slaves of the devil," though it was too true, but he observed decorum, and kept himself within due bounds, doing that only which became a prudent man. He went to the synagogue of the Jews, who, though enemies to Christianity, were free from idolatry, and joined with them in that among them which was good, and took the opportunity given him there of disputing for Christ, v. 17. He discoursed with the Jews, reasoned fairly with them, and put it to them what reason they could give why, since they expected the Messiah, they would not receive Jesus. There he met with the devout persons that had forsaken the idol temples, but rested in the Jews' synagogue, and he talked with these to lead them on to the Christian church, to which the Jews' synagogue was but as a porch. He entered into conversation with all that came in his way about matters of religion, in the market nte agora, in the exchange, or place of commerce. He disputed daily, as he had occasion, with those that met with him, or that he happened to fall into company with, that were heathen, and never came to the Jews' synagogue. The zealous advocates for the cause of Christ will be ready to plead it in all companies, as occasion offers. The ministers of Christ must not think it enough to speak a good word for Christ once a week, but should be daily speaking honorably of him to such as meet with them. The inquiries which some of the philosophers made concerning Paul's doctrine. Observe who they were that encountered him, that entered into discourse with him, and opposed him. He disputed with all that met him, in the places of concourse, or rather of discourse. Most took no notice of him, slighted him, and never minded a word he said, but there were some of the philosophers that thought him worth making remarks upon, and they were those whose principles were most directly contrary to Christianity. The Epicureans, who thought God altogether such a one as themselves, an idle inactive being, that minded nothing, nor put any difference between good and evil. They would not own, either that God made the world or that he governs it, nor that man needs to make any conscience of what he says or does, having no punishment to fear nor rewards to hope for, all which loose atheistical notions Christianity is leveled against. The Epicureans indulged themselves in all the pleasures of sense, and placed their happiness in them, in what Christ has taught us in the first place to deny ourselves. The Stoics, who thought themselves altogether as good as God, and indulged themselves as much in the pride of life as the Epicureans did in the lusts of the flesh and of the eye, they made their virtuous man to be no way inferior to God himself, nay to be superior. Esse alicid quo sapiens antecedat deum, there is that in which a wise man excels God, so Seneca, to which Christianity is directly opposite, as it teaches us to deny ourselves and abase ourselves, and to come off from all confidence in ourselves, that Christ may be all in all. What their different sentiments were of him, such there were as there were of Christ. v. 18. Some called him a babbler, and thought he spoke, without any design, whatever came uppermost, as men of crazed imaginations do. What will this babbler say? Hospermologos hudos, this scatterer of words, that goes about, throwing here one idle word or story and there another, without any intendment or signification, or, this picker up of seeds. Some of the critics tell us that the term is used for a little sort of bird, that is worth nothing at all, either for the spit or for the cage, that picks up the seeds that lie uncovered, either in the field or by the wayside, and hops here and there for that purpose. Avicula parva qui semina in triorius dispersa collegier solet. Such a pitiful contemptible animal they took Paul to be, or supposed he went from place to place venting his notions to get money, a penny here and another there, as that bird picks up here and there a grain. They looked upon him as an idle fellow, and regarded him, as we say, no more than a ballad singer. Others called him a setter forth of strange gods, and thought he spoke with design to make himself considerable by that means. And, if he had strange gods to set forth, he could not bring them to a better market than to Athens. He did not, as many did, directly set forth new gods, nor avowedly, but they thought he seemed to do so, because he preached unto them Jesus, and the resurrection. From his first coming among them he ever and anon harped upon these two strings, which are indeed the principal doctrines of Christianity: Christ and a future state, Christ our way, and heaven our end, and, though he did not call these gods, yet they thought he meant to make them so. Tun ie son kai ten anastasin, Jesus they took for a new god, and anastasis, the resurrection, for a new goddess. Thus they lost the benefit of the Christian doctrine by dressing it up in a pagan dialect, as if believing in Jesus, and looking for the resurrection, were the worshipping of new demons.